Yeah, we back. Yeah, we back. Now, today, man, we're going to have a different type of video, bro. We're going to talk about that conflict that's ongoing as we speak, but I'm not really going to talk about that in particular. We're going to talk about what can black men learn from what's going down at this very moment, right? Now, I've already made my position known on the conflict that's going on. I'm not going to waste any breath, any time speaking on that. But I do want to make some observations and definitely extract some lessons that us as black men, we can take from the situation. Now, before we jump into the video, I want to play a clip from the brother Pan-Africanism Strikes Back. He did a live stream on the topic yesterday, and I want to analyze a quote that he had mentioned. So, not wasting no time, let's get into it.
But what I know is that Nietzsche said, beware that when fighting monsters, you yourself do not become a monster. For when you gaze long into the abyss gazes also into you.
All right, we back. Now, I want to analyze that quote from Friedrich Nietzsche, right? And listen, and if you've been following me for a very long time, then you already know how I see the world, right? I already told you what life is about, and I told you what life is not about. But in this video, I just want to make some observations, right? I just want to make some observations, and then I'm going to, really analyze that quote by Friedrich Nietzsche and give my opinion on it, my interpretation of the quote. But first things first, I'm going to play a little clip from the president of Israel speaking on the current situation, and then I'm gonna come back and we're gonna take a look at some things on social media. Anyway, let's continue. Let's get into it.
But we're at war. We are at war. That's the truth. And then when a nation protects its home, it fights. And we will fight until we'll break their backbone.
All right, we back. Now, if you take a look up on the screen, this is a screenshot from a viral clip where I guess this was an Israeli man. He was inside his house taking shots at the Palestinians because apparently, I believe Israel has enacted a blockade where ain't no food, electricity, nothing going through Gaza right now. I could be wrong. I'm not really following the situation too closely, so I'm not going to act like I have a mastery on the subject. But I do want to give my interpretation on that quote by Friedrich Nietzsche. I've been looking around. I've been seeing that quote being posted all over social media in the past few days, right? And nobody's stupid. We all know what it's in reference to. Because if you grew up in any school system, in any school district, wherever you went to, private school, public school, boarding school, wherever you went, it was definitely mandatory reading for you to understand the trials and tribulations of the Jewish people. You definitely had to read at least one book that gave you a basic summary of what happened to that certain group of people. So when people drop that quote, what they are basically saying is, as someone who has been the underdog in certain situations, as someone who has been in those shoes, maybe perhaps in the past, they should understand certain things a little bit better than everybody else. That's why I think that the quote has been circulating all over social media. Now, I'm going to give you my interpretation of the quote, right? Because yes, we know what happened. We know what happened back in World War I, World War II, I believe it was. But in my opinion, like I said in my video regarding Amari Stoudemire, the reason why you see a lot of black people from all over the world riding the waves of the Palestinians is because you see yourself in the Palestinian. You see yourself in that underdog story. You see yourself in that narrative of, David and Goliath, the underdog coming up against the great power. Because I had raised the observation that apart from that narrative that you believe that you share with the Palestinian, you have nothing in common. You have nothing in common. The black African man has nothing in common with the Arab Muslim man, apart from maybe our black Muslim brothers, in the Sahel, up in, East Africa, whatever. But besides the spiritual beliefs, that's a whole different thing. But besides that, we have nothing in common with the Arab Muslim man. The black African man, we have nothing in common. And if you want to be honest, you could say that's one of our adversaries. If you want to keep it a stack, if you want to keep it all the way real, you could say that's on the list of our adversaries. One of our main adversaries going on thousands of years. So when I seen this conflict pop off, listen, I declared neutrality. That shit don't got nothing to do with us, brothers. But I do want to extract some lessons from what's happening, right? Because like I told you, since we are young children, they give us the story of Martin Luther King. They give us the story of I had a dream that one day we all holding hands and hugging each other and we never being violent and we never throwing a punch and we loving each other like brothers and sisters, blah, 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 blah. Listen, you already know. And up here, I got a tweet, right? I believe this is from Ross Gerber, the co-founder, president, and CEO of Gerber Kawasaki Wealth and Investment Management. Earlier this year, he put out a tweet. He said this: Martin Luther King changed the world. An inspiration to what's possible without using violence. Paid the ultimate sacrifice to make our nation a better place. His legacy will never be forgotten. Now, listen, if you sat in the classrooms of America, if you are a young black boy that came up in the educational institutions of America, then you already know they shoved the image and narrative of Martin Luther King down your throat as soon as you were able to read and write. They didn't say a word about Dessalines. They didn't say a word about Samuel Toure. They didn't say a word about Amilcar Cabral. They didn't say a word about Thomas Sankara. They didn't say a word about Patrice Lumumba. They didn't say a word about Nat Turner. They didn't say a word about Denmark Vesey. They didn't say a word about Charles Delon. They didn't say a word. But I guarantee you, they never missed an opportunity to reiterate the fact that Martin Luther King was the man, and they gotta let you know. Listen, no violence. Listen up, little black boy. Hey, you heard what he said? Martin Luther King, no violence. He had a dream of no violence. All right, you heard what he said? No violence. You heard? Okay, all right, no violence. No violence. No violence. Now let's take a look at another tweet that was put out by this gentleman by the name of Ross Gerber, where he said this yesterday. So we are asked to not attack the murderers and terrorists. We are somehow at fault for defending our people. You will not stop what is about to happen. Hamas will be destroyed, and there is nothing that will stop it. Nothing. Now, listen, this was the same guy who earlier this year talking about Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King, we had a dream of what happens with no violence, no violence. Now, all of a sudden, when it's his folks, when it's his people, now it's, listen, you can't stop what is about to happen. We about to ride down right now with that. You see, when it comes to us, brothers, they talking about Martin Luther King. They don't want to talk about Dessalines. But when it comes to they folks, now it's, listen, you can't stop what is about to happen. We about to ride that. Listen, and that's what I say. Go back to my very first video that I ever uploaded on YouTube. It is called Black Men Must Understand Life is About Power, Not Morality. And to be honest, I'm kind of confused at the position that has been taken by the good brother Pan-Africanism Strikes Back, because he is a self-proclaimed black Republican. So on different occasions, I've heard him bring up the doctrine of might makes right. He is a believer of might makes right. So I'm kind of confused that he is now taking the moral high ground in regards to the situation with Israel versus Hamas. So, and I'm not calling the brother out. It ain't no beef. It's just an observation that I made, because Republicans tend to justify the geopolitical actions taken by America by saying, well, America as the dominant power on the globe has the right to exert its influence upon the smaller nations of the planet. So if we are going to believe the might makes right doctrine, we got to believe it all the way around. We can't just, we can't hopscotch with it. But like I said, I'm not calling the brother out. It's no beef, brother. Listen, it's all love, man. It's all love, bro. But like I said before, I love to always bring these type of topics back to how it can relate to us. So, and my channel is always with the historical content. So yeah, I'm going to use historical examples of that Friedrich Nietzsche quote in action, where he talks about beware when fighting monsters, do not become a monster. Now we have to really dive deep into what is the definition of a monster. What does a monster do? And we have to interpret it from different point of views. Now, probably one of the most famous examples in black history of the person who was getting bullied, the person who was, downtrodden, the person who was getting pushed around ended up becoming the dominant power, or one of the most dominant powers in the region, and began bullying other people, began victimizing other people, right? It ain't no fun when the rabbit got the gun or whatever they talking about, right? So we are going to use a historical example. We are going to talk about the Kingdom of Dahomey. The Kingdom of Dahomey officially emerged in the early 17th century, around the year 1600, initially being overshadowed by other neighboring kingdoms, way more powerful at the time. And when you're a very tiny kingdom in pre-colonial Africa surrounded by extremely powerful nations on all sides, you'll quickly find yourself in a situation where you are under the, I don't want to call it the dominance, but under the influence of a superior power. Because in the context that our forefathers lived, they were battling each other for power and influence in the region. So for the first century or so of its existence, you could say Dahomey was somewhat of a subordinate entity to other more powerful kingdoms, other more powerful states. So like we said, Dahomey officially came up on the scene in the year 1600, but it wouldn't be up until the early 1700s that they began to make their presence felt in the region. Right? We got King Agaji. He came to the throne in 1708, and he began expanding the territory. We taking the show on the road. We going on the warpath. We going on the conquest. We taking shit. Yeah, we taking shit. King Agaji, he expanded the territory of the kingdom by conquering Alata in 1724 and conquering Ouida in 1727. These military campaigns would solidify Dahomey as a rising regional power. Now keep in mind, they've already been in existence for over 100 years by this time, right? Over 100 years of existence, and now they're finally coming up on the scene. But during those over 100 years of what I call of them being a subordinate entity to other more powerful nations, they had to capitulate to a lot of humiliating agreements during that time, right? Because when you are a subordinate entity, especially in the context of pre-colonial West Africa, you got to pay tribute to the dominant power. Number one, you got to pay tribute. This could be in the form of goods, or you got to just straight up pay money. Like, you got to just straight up, or resources, or whatever they want. Whatever the dominant power wants to extract wealth from the subordinate. And during this time, as you already know, the transatlantic slave trade was going bananas. So in most circumstances, Dahomey had to offer their citizens to the dominant power. Yes, because the dominant power said, yeah, we need them slaves. We need them slaves, my boy. Yeah, we need them slaves. So you better have them slaves next Monday. You know what I'm saying? We need them slaves next Monday. So for decades and decades and decades, Dahomey, the citizens of Dahomey, were sold into slavery and spread all over the Western Hemisphere. To the Caribbean islands, to North America, to all over the place, bro. Descendants of Dahomey is all over the place. That's how you even had Atoya, the woman who raised Dessalines, right? The woman who raised Dessalines was one of the women that was active during the Haitian Revolution, because, like I said, just like many other nations in Africa, Dahomey was one of the main ones sold into slavery. So it wouldn't be up until the 1700s that Dahomey began to exert some of its own power and stop, getting pushed around and punked around. Because, to be honest, at the beginning of its existence, Dahomey was getting punked around, bro. Dahomey was getting pushed around by a bunch of different nations, by a bunch of different ethnic groups. They was just, man, I'm telling you, man, Dahomey was getting jumped. But like I said, in 1708, when King Agaja came to the throne, the tables began to turn. Now, of course, like I said, in the 1720s, when those military campaigns expanded the size of the kingdom, this led to intense warfare with their neighbors, because, like I said, the dominant power is not going to sit back and allow you to simply just expand your power against their economic interests. So now this led to constant warfare against the Oyo Empire, which was originally the dominant power in the region. Unfortunately, during these military confrontations, Dahomey was not successful and ended up becoming a tributary state under the dominance of the Oyo Empire. And when you are a tributary state, not only do you have to pay tribute, obviously, but you have to politically and militarily align with the dominant power. You have to provide troops as well during times of war. You need to acknowledge the authority of the dominant power. And the dominant power usually dictates the foreign relations as it relates to the, as we call the puppet state or the tributary state. And you also have to contribute to the economy of the dominant power, providing resources, labor, agricultural products, pay taxes. Man. So unfortunately for Dahomey, as it began to expand its territory, the big dogs from the Oyo Empire came through and shut that whole shit down. You know what I'm saying? They shut that whole shit down. They were like, listen, bruh, this is my block. You know what I mean? So now the Dahomey found themselves under the yoke of the Oyo Empire in the early 1700s. And it was around this time that they began to heavily militarize their society. Because like I told you, it was a tiny, Benin, the modern day nation of Benin, is still a tiny nation compared to the massive nations surrounding it, like, Nigeria and all the other nations surrounding it. So it was a tiny nation surrounded by a lot of militaristic power. So they began to heavily militarize their nation, and they began to go on the war path, right? Because they were under attack by all these dominant powers surrounding them. So they say, you know what? Now we going on the conquest. Now we taking the show on the road. Now we gonna ride down on we gonna ride down on niggas in the same way they were riding down on us. Not only did they militarize the society, but they centralized the authority of the government and reduced the power of the local chiefs. And like I told you, when Dahomey came up on the scene, they were a tiny nation surrounded by dominant powers, and they were a subordinate entity to the more powerful kingdoms. And this situation left them vulnerable to be attacked and sold into slavery, which they were. A large chunk of their citizens were captured and sold into slavery. And that is why you actually had in Dahomey, they had a all-female regiment in the military, because it was so many men and so many young boys that were captured and sold into slavery that the women had to step in and join the armed forces to defend the country. And I'm gonna always have love for those women, because it was one of those women by the name of Atoya that raised Dessalines. So listen, without the illustrious and patriotic women of the kingdom of Dahomey, we wouldn't have ever got Dessalines, bro. We would have never got Dessalines. Could you believe that shit, man? Man, imagine we never got Dessalines. We probably still be in slavery right now. Now let's continue. The military career of a Dahomey citizen began during childhood or early adolescence. The military leaders would identify individuals with specific physical aptitude, agility, and potential for discipline and military battle. And military service would be seen as a lifetime commitment. Soldiers were expected to show unwavering loyalty to the king and to their nation. Now, during this time period in the early 1700s, as Dahomey was still attempting to exert its influence, even though it was surrounded and dominated by other more powerful kingdoms, like I mentioned before, they centralized the authority of the government. And when you have a central authority as opposed to a bunch of local chiefs, it's way more efficient to carry out military operations. And when you have a society where the boys and girls begin a military career at the age of 8 years old, and you establish a culture where you receive honor and praise and status by the amount of enemies that you capture and kill, then yes, you can imagine in a very short time in the 1700s towards the early 1800s, Dahomey went from being one of the biggest victims in the region, went from being, pushed around and bossed around and everybody shitting on them, to transforming their nation and actually becoming the aggressor actually becoming one of the regional powers, actually becoming one of the belligerents, the dominators, the conquerors, the expansionists in the region, one of the imperialists in the region. And what was the primary motivation behind those actions? It's simple: to protect themselves. To protect themselves, to protect their women and children, to protect their boys and girls, to protect their sons and daughters, to protect their elders. Because like I mentioned before, for the first 100 years, for the first 125 years of their existence, they were a subordinate power to whatever dominant power was in the region during that time. It could have been the Yoruba states, it could have been the House of Fulani states, it could have been whoever it was that was dominating the scene during that time. The Dahomey had to bend their knee, they had to capitulate, they had to get on their knees and pay tribute for a very long time until they got on their feet and began to exert their own dominance and power in the region and began to ride down on niggas and began to conquer shit and began to take shit. They became the bully in the region. They became what they said, the Friedrich Nietzsche quote: when you are fighting monsters, don't become a monster. But then I raised my objection to that. What if you have to become a monster to protect those that you love? What if you have to become a monster to protect your women and children? What if you have to become a monster? Because you see us, like I told you, they feed us the Martin Luther King narrative, the MLK narrative. No violence, no nothing. But I raised the objection. What if you need to become a monster to protect those that you love? That goes back to what I said. That tweet from Ross Gerber. He was talking about Martin Luther King. Oh, look at what happens with no violence. But as soon as it's his folks in the line of fire, now you see what he says? So we are asked not to attack the murderers and terrorists. We are somehow at fault for defending our people. You will not stop what is about to happen. Hamas will be destroyed, and there is nothing that you will do to stop it. You see, listen, I have no sides in the fight, but as black men, there are lessons that we can extract from this. Everything that we have been taught in regards to how the world works, it is a lie. It is a lie. The dominant countries that you see, the most powerful nations in the world that you see today, they were established by war, conquest, expansion, and many times at the expense and off the backs of our people. And like I said in my very first YouTube video that I ever released, life is about power, not morality. Black men must understand life is about power, not morality. When you see Israel taking the stance that it's taking, you're judging them based off a scale of morality that you have established in your own mind. But they're operating from the scale of, I'm protecting those who I love, and anybody who comes against anybody I love, you will be destroyed, you will be vanquished, you will be eliminated, you will be eviscerated. And I think black men should just simply take that in, man. Take that in. I think you should just simply take that in. And when I talk about the story of Dahomey, obviously our forefathers, they were operating in a different geopolitical context to where their main political adversaries was not the Europeans during that time. Their main political adversaries was the black man to the north, or the black man to the west, or the black man to the east, or the black man to the south, who at any given moment could invade my territory and try to exert his power over my women and children. So our forefathers were battling a different type of battle during the time, right? In the context of today, the geopolitical chessboard has changed. There are different players on the field now. We have different adversaries now that are battling for different interests. So we have to adjust. We have to adjust our game plan, right? We have to adjust our game plan. But regardless of the flaws that our forefathers had, when the invaders came, when the Europeans began to wage war, when they began to wage their wars of conquest against our forefathers on the African continent, they did not go down without a fight. They did not go down without a fight. Many times they fought to the death. And I say all that to say, much respect to Martin Luther King, much respect to Martin Luther King. But that Martin Luther King quote, that Martin Luther King speech, it never really held up to the reality of the world. The Martin Luther King ideology, it doesn't really hold weight in the reality of the world, to be honest with you. You know, it sounds good. It sounds nice on paper. It sounds nice to tell children. I get it, but it's not the reality of the world, man. We can look around and we can see that's not the reality of the world, man. And to be honest, as black men, to keep it real, what's wrong with having the power to be a monster if need be? I'm not saying that you should become a monster, but what is wrong with having the power to be a monster to protect your interests? Just ask yourself that, black man. What is wrong with having the capability to activate your monster in case anybody comes against you to harm you? What is wrong with being able to activate that in times of crisis, right? What is wrong with having the capability to defend your folks by any means necessary? I know they tell us the Martin Luther King bullshit, but the reality of the matter, what is wrong? What is wrong with, I'm not saying you should be a monster, but what is wrong with having the capacity to be a monster in case somebody tries to harm those that you love? What is wrong with that? What is wrong with that? I think that's part of being a man. And to me, going back to the story regarding the kingdom of Dahomey, I think it's all about perspective, right? I think it's all about perspective because to the Palestinians, some of them may see Hamas as freedom fighters or revolutionaries fighting for a just cause. To the Israelis, they see Hamas as a terrorist organization, a criminal organization. To the Israelis, they see the Israeli Defense Force, the military, as their liberators, their defenders. But to the Palestinians, they may see the Israeli Defense Forces as an occupying force, a foreign invader. Just like, for example, we may view the Western militaries, the militaries of, the United States, France, whatever, we may view them as neo-colonizers trying to extract resources from the African continent. But the citizens of those nations, they view those militaries as the defenders of liberty, justice, and democracy and freedom across the planet. And you know what I mean? So it's all about your perspective on how you view the situation. Now, me, I have no dog in the fight, so I don't view it any which way. I'm just simply extracting the lessons that could be, taken from the event. But going back to the Kingdom of Dahomey and the subject of pre-colonial Africa, especially during the times of the slave trade, it all goes back to perspective. For example, if you were a citizen of Dahomey living in the year 1645, living at a time where the kingdom really did not have much power or influence in the region to determine its own affairs, what happens is you end up becoming resentful. You end up becoming vengeful to the more powerful kingdoms in the region that are bullying you at the time, that are exerting their influence and power over you. So now when you begin to exert dominance and power, when you begin to establish power in the region, when you begin to establish a military and an economy that can go toe-to-toe with the other powers in the region, and instead of constantly being on the defense, you are now in a position to now go on the attack. Many people might say that you have now become the monster, because it's all about perspective. You may view their actions in a negative light, but to their perspective, they view it as patriotic. They view it as nationalistic. They view it as bringing honor and respect and dignity to the nation. They view it as expanding the power of the kingdom. So I think we need to come to terms with the fact that as different groups of people, we have different interests, which is why, like I said, I'm not very tied into this current conflict that's going on, because it doesn't have anything to do with us as black men, black African men, black men in the diaspora. It doesn't. Listen, them Arabs, like I told you, they don't got love for us in that part of the world. That entire region of the planet, every country in that part of the world, they don't got love for us nowhere, bro. We could talk about how we get treated in these nations. So listen, that shit don't got nothing to do with us, bruh. I just wanted to examine that quote by Friedrich Nietzsche and just ask, what is wrong? What is wrong with having the capacity to activate your monster? What is wrong with that? Of course, as black men, we've probably been neutralized because we've been fed the Martin Luther King propaganda. But as you can see, other groups of men, they don't operate in this Martin Luther King fantasy world. As you can see, when it's their folks in the line of fire, they're not preaching Martin Luther King. They preaching, let's get active. All right. When it's their folks, they're not preaching Martin Luther King. They talking about, listen, the enemy is going to be destroyed. So listen, I think as black men, we have to take that in. We have to take that in. And also, when we study the history, the pre-colonial history of our forefathers and our foremothers, we have to understand they lived during a different time period, right? They lived during a different time period. We are living in a different context. So when we study the different geopolitical battles and conflicts that occurred during pre-colonial Africa, don't take that personally, right? I see sometimes y'all be taking that personally. Oh my God, the Africans fighting against the Africans. Brother, like I told you, a black man living in pre-colonial Africa, it wasn't no unity amongst black men during that time. Unity amongst black men is something we are trying to establish today. But like I told you, if you were living in pre-colonial Africa, you probably would have been surrounded by enemies to the north, south, east, and west. So it couldn't be no unity, because we don't know when the enemy on all sides could invade, especially if you are a tiny nation surrounded by more powerful nations. So now the motivation during that time was to become the most powerful nation in the region to protect yourself against the domination of other powers nearby. So you have to understand the context when we study pre-colonial African history, So anyways, man. It's your boy Never Card That's Celine back in the building. Yes, indeed. Cash App up on the screen, and I'm gone. Peace.
Reincarnated, I'm back in original fashion. I left on a horse and came back in the ass, and I left with abundance and came back to famine. We used to be pyramids, now we be rapping. Look how the mighty have fallen. Used to be running, now we be walking. When you be cooning, that's when they applauded. Selling your soul, your sons and your daughter. Gotta come up in this shit, they stuck in the mix. Really, my heart it be breaking. That's why I'm stacking that paper and handle my business. Pass it down in generation. Talking about money and power and building a nation. That's a deadly combination. Never be watching the TV, they pushing agendas, falsifying information. Know they got malice intentions. Step in the room and I'm feeling the tension. Enemy me watching, he blocking my vision. Came for the check cause I need my redemption. Building my kingdom, I need it protected. Ready for war like a young Money Congo. Never decided the team is the motto. Up in the crib and I'm whipping up waffles. Up in the crib and I'm smoking gelato. I'm chilling, I'm taking my pain and make it ambition. I'm blessed by the gods, but I ain't religious. I came for the power, they came for the bitch. They making no hourly wage, I got business. This is an art, and they could never be taught. Selling my soul, I can never be bought. Play with my money, I see you ain't caught. Run to the check and I do it for sport. Babylon falling, I go to the source. Packing my luggage and go overseas. Shorty be with me and she so elite. Shorty be chocolate, I'm calling her Hershey. Secret intelligence probably gon' murk me. Don't fuck with brands, cause nigga I'm Haitian. Say the wrong shit and get smack in their faces.